Welcome to Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, the weekly podcast that features the very best in career development in the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Patton McDowell, and in addition to podcasting, I'm a leadership coach, a mastermind facilitator, a best-selling author, and a speaker. I love taking these nonprofit leadership topics on the road or into your Zoom room. If you need someone for your next conference or workshop, check out my new speaking page at pattonmcdowell.com for more information. Well, I've got another fantastic conversation to share with you in this episode, and it's with Helena Scott, who serves the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society within North Carolina and Virginia. And we had a wonderful conversation that began with her great advice as to how she has stayed motivated and, in fact, passionate about a cause and an organization that she has now served for over 22 years. Of course, this is even more relevant in an era of rampant turnover in the nonprofit sector. She's got lots of great advice, not only for you as you ponder your path, but also as you ponder your leadership of those who work with you and for you. Helena's got other great advice to share, including how she has found work-life balance and how she has addressed some of the unique challenges and benefits of working for a chapter of a larger national organization. And finally, she shares some great tips as to how she's been especially effective in building volunteer teams using healthy competition. Lots of reasons to check out the show notes for this episode. It is number 199. Just go to the podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com and you'll find all of the resources mentioned, as well as more information on Helena and the great work she's doing for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Helena Scott. Helena, thank you for joining me on the path.
Thanks, Pat, and I'm so glad to be here with you.
Well, I'm excited about this conversation, Helena. You bring a wonderful and I would say unique perspective to leadership in this sector because you have been very successful, but you bring a philosophy that I think our listeners definitely need to hear. And of course, I think many of them are wrestling with this, finding their passion or reacquiring the passion maybe that brought them into the sector. And so I'm delighted you're going to talk about that. In fact, it's remarkable in an era of turnover and all the challenges of maintaining our staff talent. You've been with LLS for now 22 years.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? What has kept you with the same organization for more than 2 decades?
Sure. So I was thinking about it, and I probably have a long answer and a short answer to that. I'll start with probably a story that I share as to the why. So I started with the Leukemia Lymphoma Society in 2001. I was practically right out of college, didn't know a lot about the organization. And shortly after I started, there was a drug approved by the FDA called Gleevec. It was the first oral chemotherapy that essentially increased the survival rate for patients with a specific type of leukemia from 50% to 90%. And at that time, I remember our chief scientific officer, who actually is now our CEO, mentioned he was standing up on his desk cheering because it was so hard to get any FDA approvals passed. It would take years and years. And this was one FDA approval that had come out at that time. Coincidentally, I also met one of the first individuals that took that drug that saved her life at 22 years old. And even now, we're still in touch today. She has 3 kids living a healthy life. Fast forward, though, to 21 years. And now the stat that I share is that in the last 5 years, there have been 100 drugs approved by the FDA. 100.
Wow.
And of those 100 drugs, 75 of them were funded by the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. And it just, to me, shows, I'm in awe of the science, of the doctors. There is brilliance out there. There's so much advancements that we're making. But I think through, I'm sitting here now more inspired than ever than when I started to really understand the accomplishments, the achievements, and where we're moving towards. So that, is something that I tend to share. Also, just when I think about out of 100 drugs, 75 drugs were supported by LLS, I'm supporting an organization. I can tell people you can trust that this is an organization that's moving the needle. It
Yes.
is a smart investment. Your dollars are actually going to decisions that are absolutely making an impact in finding that cure. So that's my long answer. And my short answer is this really feels like a job to me. And quite simply, that's pretty awesome when you can be at an organization and you're doing a full-time job that I would say doesn't really feel like work. And to me, that says it all.
That's a fantastic characteristic, isn't it? We all want that when we go to work. And I love the way you kind of intersect the science behind the organization, but also the personal touch. You literally have interacted and remained friends with those survivors that have benefited from some of the drugs that LLS has helped produce. And again, your description, I think, obviously gives our listeners who likely have a sense of what Leukemia Lymphoma Society is, but maybe you could give us the official definition. What is LLS? How would you describe it to someone who's not familiar?
Yeah. So, you know, the mission statement, I can start by that, is to cure leukemia, lymphoma, Hodgkin's disease, and myeloma, and to improve the quality of life for patients and their families. That is done through a three-tier approach. So LLS focuses on research, patient support, and advocacy. We're currently the largest not-for-profit organization dedicated to funding research in blood cancer. Just to put that in perspective, since 1949. So our organization was founded by a family who lost their son at 17 years old to leukemia. And at that time in 1949, leukemia was a death sentence. The doctors basically said, take your child home. There's nothing that we can do for them.
Wow.
That family they had a passion. They decided that they really wanted to find an organization that would ensure that eventually and ultimately a child did not have to go through what their son went through, that there would also be support for the child, that there would be ability to make sure they receive the treatment. And to this day, we've really remained true to their goals and their mission. We've funded over $1.7 billion in research since 1949 that have, so taking that family, now, if that same child was diagnosed with acute leukemia, the disease that he had, he would have over a 90% chance of survival. And that's because of the work of LLS. So the research makes a difference, it matters. But then there's also the support side of it. It is terrifying. Can imagine hearing the words, "you have cancer." It's just the most heartbreaking, terrifying 3 words that you can hear. So we are really focused on supporting that patient from diagnosis through survivorship. That's through emotional support. That's through financial support. We have an incredible first connection program where when someone new is diagnosed, we will connect them with someone that's been in their shoes, that can say, "I know what you've been through." It's one thing to have family and friends that are there to support them, but they have not experienced what they've experienced. And that's one of the most invaluable resources that we could provide. And then that last piece of advocacy is, it's great that we have all of these drugs that have been approved and funded, but if patients don't have access to it, then it doesn't really matter, right?
Right.
I was kind of shocked, and maybe I shouldn't have been, by the stat I learned that 1 out of every 3 patients diagnosed with cancer ends up being in financial distress. These patients are literally choosing between food on the table and taking their chemotherapy.
Right.
And a lot of times it is just not being able to afford it. So part of what we're doing is ensuring that all patients, really regardless of their ability to pay, have access to the same treatment that any patient would in order to help them survive.
Thank you for both the definition and frankly, the reminder of some of the issues that you're dealing with, behind the surface level cure and research and drugs and all that. You're right. There are many in our communities who cannot afford the kind of treatment they deserve. And so it's great to hear you talk about that being a driver in the work you do. And well, let me go back, Helena, to that early stage. You said literally almost right out of college. Was there a passion already for the cause that led you here, or has that passion kind of developed as you started the job? How did
Sure.
that happen?
Yeah. So everyone always asks me, what was your connection to cancer? Did you have something that happened in your life? I just, since the age of 12, had this fascination with cancer. I had a dream of being an oncologist. I don't know why. I can't really pinpoint exactly what made me want to do that, but that was kind of my goal, was to be an oncologist. And I got to college. I attended Washington University in St. Louis. I was pre-med for about 3 months, and then I realized that math and science were pretty much my worst subjects.
Yeah, I've been
And
there. Yeah, been
the
there.
idea, yeah. So that dream quickly, it kind of dissipated. I realized, you know what, I trust someone else that will probably be able to kind of serve the patients in that way better than I can. But I continue to still have that passion for doing something in oncology. I think the question was what? And when I graduated, I ended up getting a job at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. And it was kind of a management program. And it was incredible. I was exposed to every kind of face and occupation as it relates to cancer, kind of learning about it. But at the end of the day, my job was more administrative. And what I realized was that I was really passionate about the patients and the interactions with them and being able to kind of to make that impact. So after about a year and a half, I Googled every cancer organization in New York City. I was living in New York at the time.
Right.
And I came across Leukemia Lymphoma Society. Quite frankly, I had never heard of the organization. At that point, LLS really didn't have the name that American Cancer Society had or some other organizations. So I interviewed and got a job as an assistant doing special events, which put me right in front and face to face with patients. And from then, it was history. I never looked back.
It's a wonderful story, and well, and I guess to continue that story, I guess has the nature of your work continued to evolve, or it's just there's always something new in terms of the research and the dynamic of the world you're in that keeps it fresh, so to speak? Because as you know, many of our friends listening, colleagues in the nonprofit sector, frankly, they work at an organization 3 or 4 years, and then they're like, all right, I need to move on for different challenges, different opportunities, but it sounds like you've had that throughout your kind of path.
Yeah, I mean, so from a kind of professional side, I've certainly kind of moved within the organization, change roles. I mean, that's the beauty of a national organization, is the ability to be able to kind of take on, to have that fluid movement from, being able to work on one campaign to another. I remember it was probably about 10 years ago, we had a speaker from the organization who was on the mission side and talked about why there was a stat that he shared that only 10% of all cancer diagnoses is blood cancer, yet 40% of all FDA approvals were first approved for blood cancer. So it was this kind of inaccurate statement. And what he shared at the time was that it is a lot easier to test and do trials on blood cancer.
Right.
It's in the blood, right? So blood is all over the body. It's in a liquid form, so it stays alive longer. And so, why it's harder to do testing on solid tumors is because once you take that out of the body, you really just have one shot at testing at that tumor. And it just makes it a lot harder to see those advancements. Whereas you could do multiple testing with a patient who has a blood cancer. And it was kind of that aha moment for me. It seemed like such an obvious thing and answer that you would
Right.
know, but people don't. And that kind of started the understanding. And with a lot of the new treatments that came to be, that kind of at the end of the day, cancer is cancer. If we find a cure for one, we're going to find a cure for all. But so much of it started at that blood cancer level. Chemotherapy was first approved for a blood cancer patient. Bone marrow transplants were first approved for a pediatric leukemia patient. And then, and again, I can kind of talk forever about,
That's all right.
the advancements, but, immunotherapy, that's kind of a buzzword right now in when you kind of are talking about cancer treatments, and our CEO calls it Star Wars medicine in terms of what you're doing, and literally you're kind of going in and kind of changing the configuration of a cell, putting it back in the body, killing the cancer. It's crazy. And that treatment was first tried in a leukemia patient, and that doctor actually sat on a panel about a couple months ago. I was sitting in a panel listening, and he literally said if it hadn't been for LLS that invested the money in such high risk treatment, we wouldn't be where we are today. And that was pretty awesome to hear, that our organization was willing to take a risk on something that ended up being life-changing and game-changing. So it's stories like that that's just, as I kind of continued my career, there would be a new drug that would come out. I'd meet a patient who is taking that drug that was funded by LLS, who's alive. And that just was a constant in my world and in my journey with LLS.
And your passion is evident. Again, typical of someone like you who has started, again, I think it's fascinating that you started with a focus on oncology, and you've literally followed a path that's allowed you to do that. And I guess some of the advantages, again, for those listeners, Helena, maybe coming out of college. And by the way, more and more folks are coming out of college in programs in the nonprofit sector, nonprofit management or philanthropic leadership or whatnot. Or were there advantages of being part of a larger organization, as you put it, that gave you opportunities? I guess there's a built-in network of colleagues that has helped you kind of evaluate opportunities for you. But maybe could you speak to that in terms of being part of LLS as a career opportunity?
Sure. So, and I think I didn't really know at the time, right, when I first started, because I didn't know what I wanted my path to be. I took this job, and I think within the first 5 years, right, I was exposed to, I was supporting one campaign, which I loved. It was fantastic. And then there was a campaign. I actually was motivated to run a marathon through LLS because one of the campaigns that was launched in 1988 was called Team in Training. It was the largest sports endurance program connected to charity, and we were the first. And I couldn't believe kind of seeing people that would never have run a marathon that could do a marathon, and that inspired me. And so I signed up and I trained. That was actually some of the first personal fundraising that I ever did. That motivated me to then, want to be a part of that campaign. So I was able to kind of switch and move into that campaign that I ended up overseeing for about 10 or 11 years prior to my move to Charlotte. And it was game changing. And throughout, once I had that move, I realized, so first it was a blessing in disguise. My family ended up moving to Charlotte in 2015. It was because of my husband's job. And I will say that what gave me the most anxiety was the prospect of not working for LLS. I mean, at this point, it's been a part of my identity. The beauty of the organization is that there were markets across the country. At the time, they were looking for a leader to really help propel the Charlotte community and bring them forward. And it took me out of specific campaigns into a bigger impact in terms of overall leadership and really kind of leading a market versus leading a campaign. And, I was at the time that I think I was ready to do something a little bit bigger. And LS provided me that opportunity that I can stay with the organization and kind of find, be able to really take that passion for what I love doing into something larger, into being able to kind of move into that type of role.
Well, that's a good segue to the question I was going to ask you. How has your job changed? When people ask you, all right, what do you do now in terms of market leadership versus campaign leadership? What does that mean for someone who's thinking about, again, an opportunity like yours? What exactly do you do?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I worked on campaigns, meaning fundraising events, pretty much my entire life. I loved it. I love the excitement of the events and just the energy that came with it, constant going and going and going. And I remember way back, gosh, it probably was at this point, I don't even know, 10 years ago, someone that I had met was not really associated with campaign. I didn't really know at the time exactly what she was doing, but she was really focused on major gifts. And her job was really just to talk to the mission of the organization. And I was in awe of how naturally she spoke about LLS, her ability to just really just know all these different aspects of what LS did and be able to kind of share that so easily and talk about it with donors. And I remember thinking, like, at one point I would love to be able to do that and just kind of focus on that mission of LLS. That was a major gifts position that she had. And what I realized kind of over the last couple of years is, I believe so passionately about LS's mission and this organization. This will be the organization that cures cancer. I want to share that with everyone, and I want to connect people's passion and mission with what LS is doing. So, I ended up my current role, and actually I accepted this a couple of weeks ago, so I'll be starting in 2 weeks, is Regional Director of Advancement, where really I'm focusing on connecting with the individual regarding what their passion is, what within LLS inspires them. Are they interested in the research component? Are
Right.
they interested in the support? And being able to highlight all that LS is doing and be able to kind of steer their donation to what very specifically they are passionate about.
That's fantastic. And first of all, congratulations. Not
Thanks.
surprised that you're going to continue to take kind of your leadership talents in new directions and obviously help the organization in new and different ways. But it leads to something I thought it fascinating. You described how LLS is almost part of your identity, and you are a wonderful ambassador of that. But how does it affect, again, the proverbial work-life balance? I'm sure, like many of our colleagues listening, your to-do list is never done. So how
Yeah.
have you managed that? And particularly that, I guess there's an intensity to the work you do, right? And the kind of families you interact with in particular. So how do you manage, quote, work-life balance?
Yeah. And I'd love to say that I mastered it, but it's still a work in progress, if I'm being
Yes,
quite
indeed.
honest. I think, for me, I was always so personally ambitious, feeling like, which we say to our donors, every dollar is a dollar going to the mission. Doesn't matter if it's $100,000 or $5. And for a while, that was kind of ingrained in my mentality is, okay, I need to secure every single dollar, every possible dollar. Well, that's a 24-hour job. If I really wanted to try and do that, I would be working from the minute I woke up till the time I went to bed. And, I think at 25, 28 years old, I was in a different place in my life, and I was able to be out there and have fun doing that. Fast forward now, I have 3 kids under the age of 11, and there's a balance there. And I've come to understand and just really, I think, having to come to terms with there's always going to be more that we can do.
Yeah,
There's always
yeah,
going to be another donor out there. There's going to be more money that can be raised. And you sometimes have to leave those dollars on the table for the longer term investment
yeah.
of what can happen in the future. Meaning if, we burn staff out because they're working 24/7, the turnover of staff that is disastrous to have to train a new staff. So, we could have said that staff that was working, were brought off for all of those, those hours are, they're bringing in extra X amount of dollars, but at the end of the day, if she ends up leaving the organization, there's a much larger negative impact to the organization. And
Such a good point.
I took that to heart myself and really kind of looking at my Outlook calendar and prioritizing making personal appointments, meetings. And that was a big kind of change. Someone kind of said to me is, things that you need to do in your personal life, like that's a priority.
Absolutely.
And how do you incorporate that into your work, make it a priority, kind of, level set that. And I think for me that has been a big change and kind of understanding what my limits are, and being able to say, I think work-life balance in the not-for-profit is always going to be a challenge for those who are passionate because they always want to do more, right?
Right.
You always want to
Right.
continue.
Hard to turn it off, isn't it? Right.
And it's a reminder that you'll be better at your job for allowing yourself to take those moments for you and not feel emotionally exhausted at the end of the day. And it's easier said than done sometimes, but just recharging ends up making you a much more effective worker and fundraiser at the end of the day.
Well, great advice. And thank you for modeling, the importance of those personal appointments, for example, because I think a lot of our colleagues in the sector don't feel maybe that comfort. And so you as a leader modeling that, I'm sure has a very positive trickle-down effect. If others see that, they see that their lives on a personal level are equally important and they can balance that. And yes, my goodness, if we are pushing our people too hard for short-term goals and we lose them, then obviously that is negative for the organization. I have to ask you though, again, you alluded to your calendar. From a personal productivity standpoint, Helena, how do you stay organized? You've got things coming at you from millions of directions. I'm just curious, how have you found certain systems or rituals help you kind of stay organized, stay ahead of the list, so to speak?
Some of this is the obvious. I mean, I think, I always say this, some of the simplistic things work, right? Before you open your computer in the morning, you have to make a to-do list and you need to prioritize. And I think what I've in the past I've tended to do, right, is you procrastinate on the things that you least enjoy doing. And then at the end of the day, you're still going to need to do it. That's going to come back to you. And so I've started to now really force myself to start with those, those projects or tasks that I really don't, I least enjoy, try to
Right.
get that done because then I'm really motivated, by the end of the day. The other thing that was the greatest advice that I could have received, and this was really in the world of COVID, was, I think everyone thought that when we were virtual, that it would make it easier because you're not driving to meetings and you're able to, just be in one place. But the issue that happened was, well, what ended up happening was people were just scheduling meetings back to back with no breaks. They were
Right.
going from
Right.
one Zoom call to another Zoom call, and they couldn't think. You couldn't actually absorb one meeting to the next. And so one thing that I have kind of ensured that I do now, it was almost like you used to have this built-in travel time, and then you did it when everything was virtual. So I started blocking at least 15 minutes before every meeting and after every meeting so
Smart.
that I made sure I had time to debrief myself. I had time to kind of gain composure from the meeting I just had to also ensuring that have time to prep for the next meeting. And that was really a game changer for me.
Love that, Helena. In fact, I've seen more people, instead of defaulting to the hour-long meeting that sometimes our calendar programs just automatically assume, being more intentional of just let's set the meeting for 45 minutes, right?
Yeah, that is really, it's also psychological. I think an hour is a pretty long time.
Exactly.
You could accomplish what you need in 45 minutes if you set your mind to it. So that I think people have welcomed that those meetings are no longer an hour, but yes, it's 45 minutes and we will accomplish what we need to do.
Could not agree more. Well, let me shift gears with you. You and I share a kind of a chapter affiliation. When I was working for Special Olympics, first the international office and then a chapter office, it happened to be North Carolina. I wanted to ask you a question that I pondered then. I guess the challenges or opportunities of working for a chapter organization. The degree of independence maybe that you have working here in North Carolina, but obviously you're part of a larger organization. What's that like?
I think it's almost the advantage is the disadvantage. The beauty of working for a national organization can obviously pose those challenges. First off, so the benefits, right? You we have a team that is providing all of the templates, all of the materials to ensure that we have a, really a product that across the board is going to, look the same, that we're sending that same message, versus us needing to recreate the wheel, kind of creating every document, every project, all of that work that takes away from what we need to do to raise money and do our jobs. So, that has been an incredible resource at LLS. At the same time, there's an ability. I've definitely had an opportunity to be innovative and creative, and I think you need to in the not-for-profit space. But there's also, certain standards, whether you agree or not, that you need to follow, and that there's a bigger reasoning, a bigger picture beyond just your local market. And that could be hard sometimes because you feel like you have an idea that you believe is going to generate way more funds for the organization, but someone else is telling you, nope, you can't do it because you have to play this specific video or you need to relay this messaging. And I've come to appreciate, though, yes, it's tough, but I think there's a strategic plan that goes beyond that 1 year, right? Large organizations have strategic plans 3 to 5 years. There's a reason, trust the organization that there's a reason that, we're mandated to do certain things. So I think that's been tough for me, just for someone I'm so innovative. I'm brainstorming all the time and kind of coming to terms with, there are some things we can absolutely do, and there are some things that I can't, and be okay with that. And I think the other thing is, to being in a large organization, you might assume that automatically generates this, collaboration, that everyone is working together. Or, what I found is actually, it's harder with such a large organization. People are in their silos, even within the market. There's so many different aspects to what we're trying to do that, sometimes one person's not talking to the other. And I think that is a concerted effort that the team has to make, to understand that you will always raise more revenue for the organization when you're collaborating, when you might be willing to give up, some revenue in order to, push a family to then raise more in a different campaign. And that's hard when people have their own goals and their own budgets. And LS has done a really good job recently of kind of talking about the one LLS model, that we've got to look more broadly and holistically at the individual and what we're trying to do, and not worry too much about the budget for this campaign and hitting goals. Because at the end of the day, we're only successful if we hit the goals for the organization.
Yeah, you articulate that beautifully, and it seems to me like many of the things you're doing, it's rooted in communication, right? Because the challenge we had often were donors saying, "Well, I'm getting fundraising appeals from the national office, from the state office, and from my local office." And if, as you said, if we're not kind of collaborating, or we appear to be at cross purposes, so. Do you find yourself kind of having to make sure that's clear when folks are, I'm guessing, asking you similar things like, "Hey, Helena, I want my money to stay here," or something like that? How do you kind of juggle that?
Yeah. So, and I guess I'm going to kind of talk about what my new role is and what's exciting about it. And at the end of the day, the trust that people have for the organization. We, as a whole, when you're for the campaign and for events, you can't necessarily earmark funds towards, a local, to know that it's going specifically to this local hospital.
Right.
That can be hard for people. That's probably the other, if I have to say, kind of challenge of a national organization is the funds are absolutely going up to come back down, but sometimes those donors want to hear that, nope, I am earmarking, it's going to this. I'm definitely, that my funds are going to be impacting this. The beauty of what I'm doing now is through advancement, that is not through campaign, is that for any donor that supports the organization with a donation of at least $10,000, they are allowed to earmark their funds, and they are allowed to look at the portfolio of LS and say, I want to fund specifically the lymphoma platform, or I want to support patient aid. And that does go a long way with some folks. The other program or initiative that we just implemented, and as an organization, I think this has really gone a long way, is local patient aid programs, meaning that people can give donations and it will go to patients just in North Carolina. And that's a big deal. I will say,
Right. Right.
coming from New York City, people weren't that loyal to New York, to Manhattan, right? Like they're not, many people aren't from there. They weren't that concerned with it. When I moved to Charlotte, there was just this different kind of loyalty and connection to the city. People
You're
felt
right.
proud to be here and wanted to know that they were supporting their patients here. And so that just became another ability to be able to, for those that really wanted to earmark those funds, that they can, they can at a certain point do that.
Well, it's wonderful how you have articulated again that difference. And I think other listeners perhaps involved in national to chapter organizations can learn from that. And among the things, of course, I want our listeners to learn from you is not just your general fundraising success, Helena, but you've been especially effective, it would appear to me, in volunteer engagement and building teams. And I can't think of a skill that someone listening who's an aspiring nonprofit leader having that skill. So are there certain characteristics or tactics, I guess, that you have employed to effectively engage volunteers and kind of build those teams that, in fact, have stayed with you, I'm sure, for years?
Yeah, I think to be successful in this line of work, you have to love relationship building, but genuinely love it. It can't be transactional. And I think sometimes that is a challenge where people are looking at, okay, let me ask for a donation. They'll, yes, here, I get it. And then you're off to the next one. That absolutely will prohibit you from having that long-term success. So, when I first moved to Charlotte and I was new to this market, I didn't have family or friends here. I made it my mission to just go and connect and meet as many people as I could, regardless if they were potential major donors, if, I had an agenda of what I thought that they can do. It was really understanding the community. It was us understanding the person, but also it was me being vulnerable and sharing a bit about myself. I would, in every conversation, it was not just about LLS. I was talking about, my family. I was talking about, just those, challenges, being vulnerable. I was learning about, the volunteer. And that was the foundation for what really, kind of propelled that relationship forward in the future. I was meeting the wife of a board member because this is, it's a family affair. You cannot, these individuals that are doing things that it's
Affects all
the
of them, right?
family. The family is engaged. So I remember one of the first people that I met was the wife of one of our board members, who ended up being an incredible volunteer for the organization, who had really not known much about LLS. She knew it was her husband's thing. That was his passion. She supported it wholeheartedly, but really forming those relationships from the beginning and being really authentic. That is so important with just developing those relationships with the individuals and doing that in person. Some advice that I received that I just always kind of took, and this was a challenge, right? When COVID hit, was that someone said to me, you can maintain relationships via email and maintain relationships via phone or build those, but you can't, in order to grow the relationship or in order to enhance that has to be in person. That has to be face to face. Zoom in it a little bit easier because before then we weren't in the nature of having that video, and in addition to just, emailing and phone, but it's the investment of time that we feel like we don't have because we're racing from one thing to the next, to go and sit down and have a coffee meeting with someone and meet with them in person. And, you're going to just being able to see their their reaction and their face, and it's something that you just can't fully get over Zoom. You can't see that in an email. They can't see your passion always kind of through that phone call.
Yeah.
And that inspires people to want to help because they understand, wow, this is an investment that you believe in. And so I'm inspired to do the same. So that is, that is a big piece of it. I think the more you develop their trust and the more they understand, for me, how excited I am about the work that I do, how passionate I am, that allows you to push people more because they know that you're being genuine. So when you're to be a successful fundraiser, you have to push. You have to be unapologetic and be afraid to ask big.
All right.
I start a conversation with volunteers often, and I actually tell them, I'm warning you that I am going to push you. I am going to ask you to shoot for the moon. But I say to them, you have to promise me that if you're not comfortable with doing something, or because of a business relationship that you just don't feel like you can pursue that you'll let me know. So I'm only going to work with you and move forward if you promise me that you're going to tell me no when you can't do something. And that conversation, just putting it out there in itself, allowed me to truly push volunteers that initially had a goal of raising 50,000 to that same individual with his team raising over 600,000, because it gave me the liberty to motivate without having it feel like it was disingenuous and that it wasn't real, and that I had to apologize for what I was doing.
I love that. And what a wonderful platform you create, or a conversation starter, because they know what you're here for, right? I mean, if folks that they know if we work for a nonprofit and that we are likely going to be seeking their investment. But of course, we also, you and I know that there are a lot of, I guess, younger fundraisers that feel the pressure. And so they perhaps hit too quickly for the transactional appeal, right? The solicitation.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you have built a wonderful relationship building technique there, right? Like, hey, yeah, I am going to push you, but I'm also going to build the relationship as a volunteer. Is that fair, Helena, that you're not going straight for the jugular in terms of fundraising? You're building a relationship, and you're also giving them a preview of, I hope the investment will follow.
Absolutely. I mean, I received an incredibly generous donation. So one of the other things for me is, you've got to, walk the walk. And I started fundraising personally for LS at the start of my career. Every year I continue to fundraise. Every year I'm reaching out. I'm being just as vulnerable as our fundraising participants, saying that, yeah, there's some fatigue. Sometimes there's that moment when I'm trying to perfect my fundraising email. I'm trying to send it
Right.
out. I have that same anxiety, that same stress sometimes when I realize I just need to share what's in my heart and put it out there. And so, my hope this year is I'm going to hit a big milestone. I've personally fundraised over 900,000 for the organization since I started.
That's remarkable.
And where some people are feeling, I feel bad asking again. I don't want to ask year after year.
Right.
What I receive, and again, it's not easy, is people being really inspired to see my commitment to that organization. And my success allows me to also be able to say, yeah, I'm doing this. In my experience, this is what I've done. So when I'm working with these volunteers, I'm able to share. I'm not just asking you to do it. I'm doing this myself. I'm invested, and this is a genuine passion for me as well.
One of our mutual friends, Helena, said about you, among the many gifts you bring to LLS and your fundraising skill, is the ability to use competition in a positive way. I wonder if you could speak to that, because I think sometimes there are volunteer board members that feel like, yeah, they're getting pressured, or the competition is not healthy in their organization in terms of fundraising. But it seems to me you've created a very positive aspect of that. And I wonder if you could share how you've done it.
Absolutely. So, one of the more successful campaigns that we have is a campaign called Visionaries of the Year, and it is a fundraising competition. It elevates people's fundraising to a level that you would never know you have the ability to do. And at the end of the day, there is a winner that's there. However, what I think the key to having people be successful is, at the end of the day, and this this is kind of whether it's sounds like a silly mantra or not, like, no matter who wins, cancer loses. And that's
Love that.
that's what I'm sharing. And although I'm bringing, and like what I started doing was hosting a holiday party for all of these candidates who are competing against each other. And at that holiday party, we brought our honored heroes, who are our patients, usually children going through treatment, and they shared their story. But then we had all of the candidates who were running against each other share their why. And they're all standing in that circle sharing the reason they said yes to the campaign. And all of a sudden, you're looking at, quote, your competitor who's this amazing individual. Like, at the end of the day, we're all trying to raise as much money for LS as we can. I'm going to work, I'm going to push myself to do my personal best. But the culmination of these campaigns, that final number that we share, is never the winner's number. It's the total amount that all of the candidates have raised, or that, what the campaign has raised as a whole. That's what we're kind of leaving people with, that we share, not the winner's total. But yeah, we broke records, and, we raised $3 million here in Charlotte with just 16 candidates, which was achieved in 2019, which is unreal.
Remarkable.
To think about
Yep.
how much, an individual with their team can raise. And I think for me, I brought those individuals together after their campaign because they got to know each other. They loved their experience. They then became friends. They then went and had coffee. And that continued to connect them to LLS. Because of LLS, they met these amazing individuals that they would never have met otherwise. So really being able to, be very kind of conscious to, how do you bring people together? At every point, how do you bring people together for that common good? Kind of those connections and those points are just, they go such a long way in terms of seeing people's commitment to the organization long term.
That's just fantastic advice. Even if you start with a competitive mindset, perhaps some of those candidates did, but you've reminded them of the collaborative value, right? The collective strength of their bonds, both financially and then personally, and that everybody wins. Cancer loses, everybody else wins. And so that is a fantastic scenario. So, Helena, so much good advice. And I really appreciate you opening up about your journey and the clear passion you still have for the cause. And congratulations again on your new role, where you're going to be able to advance literally the work of LLS in our region. Is there any other final advice? It would be clear to me that there are folks listening like, wow, I would love to feel good about my job, feel good about my work. And anything else you would advise someone listening, thinking about kind of following in your footsteps?
Yeah, I think there's probably two things. And I wonder is, don't underestimate those personal touches and those experiences that are not necessarily fundraising that could really make an impact on someone. And I'll, share just one example. We had a fundraiser. He was one of the oncologists at the local hospital. And typically, we have a staff member that introduces him to come up on stage. This was a large group of, 600 plus people. I reached out to a patient of his, someone who actually had lost their child to leukemia, and asked them if they would be willing to be the one to introduce the doctor, which he didn't know was going to happen. And she came up on that stage and just shared, although they lost their daughter, what an impact this doctor had, that he, how much respect, they were relentless, that they owed really so much of how long she was able to live to him. He was in tears. those are that's the moments that they're going to remember. That is
Exactly.
what's going to kind of keep them connected. So thinking about what are those small things that you can do that are absolutely going to touch those volunteers and leave a mark on them. And then the other piece is understanding and trying to define what does success mean to you? I don't think I ever had aspirations of being the CEO of our organization. I'm sure
Right.
many people do.
Right.
I loved working with volunteers. I loved working with just that interaction. And at a certain point in my career, I had the ability to apply for a more internal position and move up within the national organization. And, I knew in my heart I wouldn't be as fulfilled with my role. And I had to think about what was important. And so I kind of gave up that opportunity to, quote, advance to still be able to love my job and move in a direction that really felt fulfilling to me. And that happened a few times, COVID, the same thing happened. And I had an opportunity to leave the organization if I wanted to kind of stay at that level. And you just have to think about the long term, what's really meaningful, what are you trying to achieve? And so that's what I have done throughout my career is, think about how do I keep my passion for what I love doing. And, I wouldn't trade that for the world. I started saying this doesn't feel like a job, but to be able to, be coming into work and loving what I do, I feel spoiled, quite frankly. And that's something you just you can't put a dollar amount on.
Helena, it sounds like you're exactly where you need to be. And so thank you for the work you're doing for LLS and for the nonprofit and philanthropic community in general. This has been a wonderful conversation about your journey, and I know our listeners will benefit from the takeaways, many takeaways from this. One final request, and you knew this was coming, but maybe you could share a book that's been meaningful to you that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Yeah, and this goes back to kind of the simple things that you can do that make a big difference. And this was a book recently that we were asked to read as an organization. It was 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. There's a very, very similar book you could do on a personal level with your partner and family, but it really made me think about just those different acts of kindness that make a big difference. And this was really meant more internally with our colleagues, which really it certainly kind of opened my mind to just different ways that I could interact with colleagues, but then maybe realize that I was able to use the same findings externally with volunteers and have started doing that and kind of have seen, again, those little things that you do that really, that kind of leave people with that leave people with a mark that makes them to continue to want to support. So that has been one of my favorites recently.
It's a great recommendation, and I like the way you put it. It seems to me that would have value to share internally with our staff colleagues, but also might impact the work we do externally, as you have certainly done so well. All right, Helena, where can people find out more about you and the great work you're doing?
Yeah, so you can for the organization, if you want to find out more, and there is a lot, I would just say, if you go to lls.org, there are resources that expand on everything that I spoke about in terms of our mission pillars. Of course, for me personally, you can go on LinkedIn if you want to get in touch with me. But I also am very open. I love coffee meetings. I love meeting people in person. I love finding out about different individuals. If there's anything from my talk today that inspired you or that made you wanting to learn more about, please reach out. I would be more than happy to grab a cup of coffee if you're, local in the North Carolina area, and kind of help support you in what you're trying to succeed in your nonprofit endeavors.
It's a fantastic offer, and I'll encourage our listeners to check out the show notes for that and many reasons. And Helena, thank you again for joining me on The Path.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Patton, for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Helena as much as I did. and that you came away with some practical ideas that can guide you on your long-term journey and find passion in the cause that's most meaningful to you. Also, I hope it'll help you build the kind of team that every leader hopes to develop. Don't forget about the show notes. They are available on our website, pattonmcdowell.com. Just find episode number 199, and there you will find more about Helena and the great work she's doing for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society here in North Carolina and Virginia. As always, please share this episode with someone else on the path. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe. Just go to that podcast page again at pattonmcdowell.com. You will see the follow button, which will assure you don't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. They come out every Thursday. Of course, if you like this episode, click on the episodes button at the top of that same page, and you can scroll through thumbnails of some of our most popular episodes or search by topic or guest name. Thanks for all you're doing in the nonprofit sector, especially right now, and keep up the good work for causes that are most meaningful to you. I'll keep bringing you content that can help you do it even better. Have a great week. I'll see you next time on The Path.